In all of my research, all of my time of instructing writers on fictional writing, on writing about American Indians, on answering questions by email, reading a lot of books that feature Native characters, there was always something there that I couldn't quite put my finger on. It was something that no one ever brought up in Native or non-Native circles. It wasn't something that was considered a stereotype. But again, after those years of study, it was something that became clearer to me. And as I contemplated on it, I finally decided that that was the difference I would see in a lot of non-native writers versus native writers, and not even non versus native, but those who were really and truly connecting with native culture. Because I would read books that were historically accurate, they were culturally accurate, respectful of native people, but there was just something that was slightly off about the work. I couldn't figure it out. And I finally did, and that's the one I want to share in this last lesson on stereotypes. And that is the historical only view. In the late 19th century, there were several prominent men, wealthy men, who latched on to the idea that American Indians were fading, that they were becoming the vanishing race, was even coined during that time. And they ramped up efforts to capture what was left before it was all gone. You had photographers who photographed thousands of American Indians during the 1890s. You had those who were gathering what would be considered artifacts, anything that connected to that authentic American Indian history, because they viewed it as disappearing and rapidly disappearing, and they wanted to preserve it. Now, of course, there are those who say people like that were appropriating or stealing from the tribes things that they didn't want to give them, and in some cases that was true. But that began the idea that American Indians had no future. They were a people being assimilated into white culture. They were dying off from alcoholism and depression, and there would soon be no more of them and no memory of them if they weren't put in a time capsule. So when I read historical fiction or I watch about Native characters in film, there's always that sense that these people are dying, that the race is dying, the culture is dying, and that it'll be lost forever. And sadly, we talk about 500 nations being here. Many of those are gone forever. There's very little trace of them. Even today, there are strenuous efforts to preserve native languages. First speakers and elders who know it fluently, know their languages fluently, are passing on, and there's no one to take their place. But when writing, especially historical fiction, I think that's something that people connect with, especially in my books, is because when I'm writing the characters, I'm writing the dialogue, their thoughts, I'm doing it with the view that first Americans do have a future, that their descendants do live on all the way through to my lifetime. And I think that's a critical element for especially historical fiction. And if you're writing contemporary, even that, because you're thinking about the history, think about the whole history all the way through to today's time, and where are Native people going from here? One of the ways as contemporary or historical fiction author you can do this is get to know Natives today. Attend powwows, attend Native events, observe them, their culture, their families, their way of speaking, all of those things that are life ways for Natives today that came from their ancestors or were developed over the decades. There is etiquette to learn, especially when attending a powwow, and we're going to cover that shortly, but I encourage you to do it. Meet new people, meet Native people, and see where they are today so that that can influence your historical and contemporary writing. Because as a first American, I can say we're still here.